I bought the place for peace. After 27 years with the state troopers, most of them spent patrolling icy backroads and breaking up bar fights, I thought I'd earn some quiet. A modest 5-acre spread on the edge of Whispering Pines was exactly what I needed. Enough land to breathe, enough distance from people to let the noise of a hard life settle. I converted the old barn out back into something more than a tool shed. Installed reclaimed hardwood floors, strung up lights under the rafters, and reinforced the beams so they wouldn't creak in the wind. My nephew, who's better with wires than words, installed a sound system that could hum low country tunes or blast Springsteen without distortion. That barn wasn't just wood and nails. It was my saloon, my sanctuary, my clubhouse. Once a month, it became a refuge for the men I'd served with, state troopers, sheriffs, a few EMTs, and firefighters who'd been through their own wars. We drank beer, swapped stories, and remembered the ones who didn't get to grow old. No one complained. Not the neighbors across the ridge. Not the guy who sold me the place. Not until Karen moved in. She arrived in a shiny black SUV with chrome rims and tinted windows. The house next door had sat empty for almost a year, foreclosed, cleaned up, and flipped for a neat profit. I remember thinking, maybe she'll be normal. She wasn't. Karen had the posture of someone who thought the world owed her something, and the tone of someone who was sure it had paid up late. I saw her that first day with a clipboard, cataloging everything. Fence heights. Mailbox alignment. Weeds. My barn. She showed up at my gate uninvited the following week, heels clacking on the gravel like a gavel in a courtroom. "You're in violation of Whispering Pines HOA regulations," she announced, her nose wrinkled, as if the scent of barbecue offended her soul. "That structure out back isn't zoned for recreation or assembly." "It's a barn," I said. "It's a venue," she snapped. I explained, politely at first, that I wasn't charging a dime. That these were private gatherings with retired public servants who just wanted a place to sit without being judged. Her lips curled like I'd told her we were holding satanic rituals. "You'll be hearing from the board," she said, scribbling something on her pad. "This isn't a backwoods free-for-all." She left before I could ask her name. From that moment, she watched everything. If a truck pulled into my driveway, she was on her porch with a camera phone. If music played after dark, even at a whisper, she filed a noise complaint. Once, she called animal control because someone brought a service dog to a barbecue. She claimed it was a feral German shepherd. The HOA started sending letters. Petty stuff. My porch lights were too bright. My American flag was not HOA approved. A bird feeder was attracting wildlife. No kidding. Still, I held back. I didn't escalate. I didn't want a war. I'd seen enough of those with a badge on my chest. Then I decided to throw the big party. My old partner Dave was retiring after 30 years. The man had taken 3 bullets in his career, saved 2 kids from a river, and once wrestled a meth head out of a burning RV. He deserved a send-off worthy of legends. So, I planned the barn bash. Invitations went out to 30, maybe 40 people. Mostly troopers, a few firefighters, and a couple of local deputies. Dave's wife was baking his favorite cobbler, and we were going to smoke enough ribs to feed a squadron. I knew Karen would have a problem with it. I even joked with the guys, bet she calls the mayor this time. But I figured if we kept the music respectful and wrapped it up before midnight, she'd have nothing to stand on. I underestimated her. The night before the party, I came home from town and found her parked near my mailbox, phone in hand, aiming it toward the barn like a sniper lining up a shot. "Just gathering evidence," she said when I stepped out of my truck. "For what?" I asked. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You'll see." I stood there watching her taillights disappear, the sun bleeding into the treetops behind her. That was the moment I knew something bigger was coming. Something more than letters and petty fines. She wasn't just trying to shut down a party. She was coming for me. And I wasn't about to let that happen. The evening air crackled with anticipation. By 7 o'clock, the driveway was lined with pickup trucks, cruisers with old decals, and a few motorcycles that hadn't seen duty in years. Men and women who'd spent decades chasing danger now shook hands like family, their voices booming under the fading sun. Laughter rolled from the barn like thunder across a prairie. Dave arrived just before sunset, wearing his faded uniform jacket and grinning like a man who'd just been paroled from a lifetime of chaos. His wife, Cheryl, brought a tray of deviled eggs, and someone passed Dave a cold beer before his boots even touched the gravel. Inside the barn, a slideshow of old patrol photos cycled on a sheet we'd pinned to the hayloft wall. The stereo played Merle Haggard. Smoke from the barbecue pit drifted lazily upward through the open loft doors, and the smell of ribs and sweet corn had people grinning like kids at a state fair. It was more than a party, it was a reunion. A balm for all the calloused hands and weathered hearts in that room. But I couldn't relax. Not entirely. I kept glancing toward the property line, half expecting Karen's SUV to creep up like a tank in the night. When she didn't show by 9 o'clock, I almost allowed myself to believe she'd let it go. Then the sirens came. At first, they were distant. A faint howl beyond the tree line. A few heads turned, chuckled. Old habits die hard. Half the guys reached for radios they no longer carried. But the sound grew closer. Louder. Urgent. Within seconds, 2 sheriff's cruisers swung into my driveway, followed by a fire engine and, unbelievably, an ambulance. Their lights painted the barn in violent reds and blues. Conversations died mid-sentence. Beer bottles froze in midair. The music cut out. The barn door swung wide open, and I stepped outside just in time to meet Deputy Wallace, one of the newer recruits, maybe 3 years on the job. He looked nervous, like a rookie caught in the wrong locker room. "Evening, Wallace," I said, calm but firm. "Mr. Langley," he glanced past me at the crowd. "We got a 911 call. Possible illegal assembly. Reports of public intoxication, maybe a medical emergency." "From who?" Wallace didn't answer, but his eyes flicked toward the edge of my property. There she was. Karen stood at the fence, arms folded tight across her chest like a general surveying a battlefield. Her phone was still in her hand. She didn't wave, just nodded, once, like a hammer dropping. I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I didn't explode. Not yet. Instead, I turned back to Wallace. "You're welcome to come in. Everyone here's retired law enforcement or emergency services. We're celebrating a retirement. No underage drinking, no fights, no trouble. You want to walk through, be my guest." He hesitated, then nodded. "I'll take a look, just to be thorough." As Wallace stepped inside, the other deputy, an older guy named Ramirez, walked up beside me. He tipped his hat low and muttered, "I should have known it was her." "You know her? She's filed 23 complaints in 6 months. Dogs barking. Grass too tall. Kids riding bikes on the sidewalk. Last week, she claimed a neighbor's tomato plants were a public health concern." I gritted my teeth. "And you keep responding?" Ramirez sighed. "Dispatch has to log every 911 call. We don't always have a choice." Inside, Wallace was already shaking hands with a few retired captains, clearly realizing the absurdity of the whole scene. He emerged 10 minutes later, red-faced and apologetic. "Everything checks out," he said quickly. "Sorry for the disturbance, Mr. Langley. You're not the one who needs to apologize." The fire truck and ambulance crew, now visibly irritated, turned their vehicles around. The cruisers followed, lights off, embarrassed. But Karen didn't move. She just stood there, smirking like a cat that had knocked over a vase. I walked up to the fence, stopping a few feet from her. "You called in a false emergency," I said flatly. "That's a criminal offense." "I didn't say emergency," she replied with a shrug. "I said I heard screaming and suspected alcohol abuse. I was concerned for public safety. You just wanted to ruin a good night. I wanted to enforce the rules. This is a residential community, not a dive bar in the woods." Her voice dripped with smug satisfaction. She turned, already heading back to her driveway. "You can't stop what's coming," she tossed over her shoulder. I watched her disappear into the shadows. She had declared war, and now the battle had begun. But she didn't know who she'd picked a fight with. And she sure as hell didn't know who was coming to back me up. The next morning, the barn smelled like smoke and old laughter. I stood alone, cleaning up empty bottles and folding chairs, but my mind wasn't on the mess. It was on Karen. She'd humiliated herself last night, though she was too arrogant to realize it. But this wasn't over. People like her didn't back down after a loss. They doubled down. I knew enough about bullies to recognize the pattern. Escalate, escalate, escalate until they either got what they wanted or ran into something bigger than themselves. Fine. If it was a war she wanted, I'd fight it my way, clean, legal, and devastating. By noon, I was on the phone with Captain Reynolds, my old supervisor, who now sat on the county council. Then I called Marla Givens, the district attorney's assistant, who used to hand me warrants with a smile. Then I rang up Sheriff Dean himself, who owed me 2 favors and didn't mind settling debts. By nightfall, the plan was set. I didn't have to lay a finger on Karen. She'd dig her own grave. I just had to hand her the shovel. It started small. A simple motion at the next HOA board meeting. One Karen had called herself, demanding a full review of my barn activities. She distributed glossy handouts, pictures she'd taken from her driveway, blurry and harmless, depicting nothing more criminal than middle-aged men eating brisket. I attended the meeting, standing quietly in the back of the clubhouse as she launched into her tirade. This kind of unsanctioned gathering, she said, voice rising, threatens property values, invites criminal activity, and, most importantly, violates Section 4B of the Whispering Pines Code of Conduct. No non-residential assemblies without board approval. A few residents clapped, but most shifted uncomfortably. Then it was my turn. I walked to the front, set a small speaker on the table, and pressed play. The room filled with the recorded voices of retired officers and EMTs, talking about their careers, about saving lives, about the nights they didn't think they'd make it home. I'd taken snippets from the retirement speeches and stitched them together into a collage of sacrifice and duty. When the recording ended, the room sat heavy with silence. I looked Karen straight in the eye. "What you tried to shut down," I said, "wasn't a party. It was a gathering of men and women who spent their lives protecting yours. People who missed birthdays, anniversaries, and sometimes even their own kids' graduations because they were responding to emergencies." Karen's mouth twitched, but she didn't speak. I kept going. "Last night, you wasted the time of sheriff's deputies, firefighters, and EMTs, all based on a false 911 call. That's a criminal misuse of emergency services under County Statute 27.3.1. A low murmur rippled through the crowd. "And because many of the individuals you disrupted are still considered active public servants under honorary status," I added, "your actions could also be classified as obstruction of governmental operations." A second charge. Karen's skin paled beneath her makeup. "But," I said, letting the tension hang, "I'm a reasonable man. I propose an alternative." Everyone leaned forward. "You step down from the HOA board effective immediately. You issue a public apology at the next community meeting. And you agree, in writing, to cease all surveillance and harassment of your neighbors." Karen sputtered. You can't demand that." I smiled grimly. "No. But the district attorney's office can. And I'm willing to file the charges first thing tomorrow morning." Behind me, someone, maybe old Mr. Kearns from down the street, let out a soft chuckle. Karen turned scarlet, her fists balled at her sides. "This isn't over," she hissed. "You're right," I said. "It's just the beginning, if you make it that way." She stormed out, shoving the clubhouse door so hard it banged against the wall. No one clapped. No one cheered. That wasn't the way of Whispering Pines. But as I walked back to my seat, a dozen heads nodded at me, subtle and sure. The old order Karen had tried to impose, the surveillance, the petty citations, the endless complaints, had just cracked. And like all brittle things, it wouldn't survive the next blow. I intended to make sure of it. Karen didn't show her face for the next 2 weeks. Her SUV sat idle in the driveway, gathering pollen and dust. The shades on her windows stayed drawn, and her once daily patrols around the neighborhood stopped altogether. For the first time in months, Whispering Pines felt peaceful. Kids rode their bikes without fear of a citation. Neighbors chatted at mailboxes, without Karen's hawk eyes boring into them. Even the lawns, once a battleground for inch-too-tall grass complaints, grew just a little wilder, softer around the edges. But it wasn't over. At the next HOA meeting, the one where Karen was expected to deliver her public apology, the clubhouse was packed. More people showed up than I'd ever seen. Folks who usually couldn't be bothered to vote on mailbox paint colors now filled the rows, arms crossed, eyes sharp. Karen arrived 10 minutes late. She stepped inside wearing a blazer too tight at the shoulders, holding a crumpled piece of paper in trembling hands. Her face was powdered heavily, but the cracks still showed, the sagging eyes, the twitch at the corner of her mouth. Good. She took the podium, cleared her throat once, twice, then read the apology. It was stiff, mechanical. She regretted any misunderstandings and valued the vibrant, diverse spirit of Whispering Pines. She even choked out an acknowledgement of the tremendous sacrifices made by law enforcement and first responders. No one clapped when she finished. Not one soul. The silence was deeper than any boo. Karen stepped down, but before she could slink away, a tall figure rose from the crowd. Sheriff Dean himself, still in uniform, arms like tree trunks folded across his chest. I move to formally censure Karen Whitmore for conduct unbecoming of a board member and request her immediate resignation, he said, voice booming. I second, barked Mrs. Latham, the usually meek owner of the tea shop on Willow Lane. The vote wasn't even close. 57-3. Karen stood there for a frozen moment, blinking like a bird that had flown straight into a glass door. Then she gathered her papers, lifted her chin, and walked out, dethroned, defeated, done. It should have felt like victory. And it did. But not the gloating, fist-pumping kind. It was quieter, heavier, like riding a crooked fence post after a long storm. Later that evening, as the sun melted behind the pine trees, a few of us gathered around the barn again. No big party this time, just some cold beers, a couple of folding chairs, and the smell of honeysuckle riding the breeze. Dave nudged me with his elbow. You know you're a legend now, right? I laughed. Yeah, local man defeats HOA tyrant. Film at 11. Cheryl smiled. Seriously, you did good, Jack. You stood up for all of us. I took a long pull from my beer and let the night settle around me. I didn't do anything special, I said. I just reminded her that some people can't be pushed around. Across the yard, the barn doors creaked softly in the wind. A few kids zipped past on scooters, trailing laughter. Somewhere down the block, Mr. Kearns was tuning his old banjo on the porch, no fear of a noise complaint now. Whispering Pines was healing. It would never be perfect. No place ever is. There would always be someone nitpicking about trash cans left out too long or holiday lights left up too late. But after Karen's fall, everyone understood something important. This wasn't just a collection of houses. It was a community, built not on fear or control, but on respect. On the sacrifices made by those who knew what it meant to serve something bigger than themselves. The fireflies came out, blinking like tiny stars in the grass. As I leaned back in my chair, I thought about the future, about bonfires and barn dances, about neighborhood barbecues and little kids chasing dogs across front lawns. And I smiled, knowing one thing for sure. As long as good people stood up when it counted, no tyrant, no matter how loud, petty, or persistent, could ever truly win. Not in Whispering Pines. Not anywhere.